Operation Barbarossa. Hitler's invasion of the Soviet Union. The German invasion of the Soviet Union in 1941, known as Operation Barbarossa, was one of the most significant and catastrophic campaigns of the Second World War. It marked the beginning of a brutal conflict between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union, resulting in unparalleled destruction, immense human suffering, and a profound transformation of the war's trajectory. The invasion was rooted in Adolf Hitler's ideological and strategic goals, yet it ultimately became a grave miscalculation that contributed to the eventual defeat of Nazi Germany. By launching the largest land invasion in history, Hitler not only underestimated the Soviet Union's resilience but also set in motion a conflict that would become a defining feature of the Second World War. The origins of Operation Barbarossa lay in Hitler's ambitions outlined in Mein Kampf, where he articulated his belief in Lebensraum, or living space, for the German people. This concept was underpinned by the Nazi regime's racial ideology, which viewed the Slavic peoples of Eastern Europe as inferior and sought to eliminate or enslave them. The Soviet Union, led by Joseph Stalin, represented both an ideological enemy in the form of communism and a vast landmass ripe for exploitation. The Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact of 1939 had temporarily delayed this confrontation, allowing Hitler to secure his Western Front by defeating France and isolating Britain. However, Hitler's long-term vision always included the conquest of the Soviet Union, which he saw as essential to Germany's dominance in Europe. On June 22, 1941, Germany launched Operation Barbarossa, mobilizing over 3 million troops, 3,000 tanks, and 2,500 aircraft, supported by a vast logistical effort that underscored the operation's scale. The invasion was divided into three main thrusts. Army Group North, tasked with capturing Leningrad. Army Group Center, directed toward Moscow, and Army Group South, assigned to conquer Ukraine and its valuable agricultural and industrial resources. The speed and ferocity of the German assault stunned the Soviet defenders, who were caught off guard by the scale and rapid progression of the invasion. The Luftwaffe quickly gained air superiority, destroying thousands of Soviet aircraft on the ground in the opening days, while the German panzers and mechanized units penetrated deep into Soviet territory, bypassing and encircling large formations of Red Army troops. The initial German successes reflected the effectiveness of blitzkrieg tactics, which had already proven devastating in Western Europe. The Soviet military, despite its vast size, was ill-prepared for the German onslaught. Stalin had purged many of the Red Army's experienced officers in the years leading up to the invasion, leaving a command structure rife with inefficiency and fear. Moreover, the Soviet Union's military doctrine and equipment were outdated, and communication between units was disorganized. Entire Soviet armies were encircled and annihilated, with hundreds of thousands of soldiers taken prisoner. The Battle of Minsk alone resulted in the capture of over 300,000 Soviet troops, a staggering blow to Soviet defenses in the early weeks of the campaign. As German forces advanced deeper into Soviet territory, they encountered both logistical and strategic challenges. The vastness of the Soviet Union, combined with poor infrastructure, stretched German supply lines to their limits. The Wehrmacht's reliance on speed and mobility became increasingly difficult to maintain as roads turned to mud during the autumn rains and distances between supply depots and frontline troops grew immense. Despite these difficulties, Army Group Center continued its march toward Moscow, Army Group North approached the outskirts of Leningrad, and Army Group South made significant gains in Ukraine. The Soviet response, though initially chaotic, began to stabilize as Stalin called for a national mobilization. The Soviet people, faced with existential annihilation, rallied behind the Red Army, and adopted a scorched earth policy, destroying resources and infrastructure to deny them to the advancing Germans. Factories in western Soviet cities were dismantled and relocated to the Ural Mountains, beyond the reach of German bombers, where they resumed production of critical war materials. Stalin's leadership, though often brutal, galvanized Soviet resistance, and his decision to remain in Moscow during the German advance became a symbol of defiance. One of the turning points in the German invasion was the Siege of Leningrad, which began in September 1941. While Army Group North succeeded in encircling the city, the Germans were unable to force its surrender. The siege would drag on for over 2 years, becoming one of the most harrowing episodes of the Second World War, as the city's residents endured starvation, disease, and relentless bombardment. Meanwhile, Army Group centers advanced toward Moscow encountered stiffening Soviet resistance. The harsh Soviet winter, for which the German army was unprepared, further stalled the German offensive. Temperatures plunged to -40 degrees centigrade, and German troops, lacking proper winter clothing and equipment, suffered immensely. Soviet counteroffensives, led by newly mobilized reserves and reinforced by Siberian divisions equipped for winter warfare, pushed the Germans back from the outskirts of Moscow by December 1941. The failure to capture Moscow marked a significant blow to Hitler's ambitions and highlighted the overreach of the German war machine. Operation Barbarossa had been predicated on the belief that the Soviet Union would collapse within months, but by the end of 1941, it became clear that Germany had underestimated the Soviet capacity for resistance and recovery. The vast resources and manpower of the Soviet Union, combined with the strategic depth of its territory, allowed it to absorb the initial German assault, and begin reorganizing for a protracted conflict. Hitler's insistence on holding captured positions, even when strategically untenable, further strained German forces and set the stage for future Soviet offensives. The consequences of the German invasion of the Soviet Union were profound. Operation Barbarossa opened the Eastern Front, which would become the largest and bloodiest theater of the Second World War. The campaign's early successes were achieved at a terrible cost, with millions of Soviet soldiers and civilians killed, wounded, or captured. German occupation policies, marked by extreme brutality and genocide, further deepened the horrors of the invasion. The Einsatzgruppen, Nazi death squads, followed in the wake of the advancing Wehrmacht, conducting mass executions of Jews, communists, and other targeted groups. The occupation of Soviet territory saw widespread atrocities, including the destruction of villages, forced labor, and the systematic starvation of prisoners of war. The failure of Operation Barbarossa also marked the beginning of Germany's decline. By failing to achieve a decisive victory before winter, the Germans found themselves embroiled in a prolonged war of attrition for which they were unprepared. The Soviet Union, by contrast, began to harness its vast resources and industrial capacity, producing tanks, aircraft, and weapons at an astonishing rate. The resilience of the Red Army and the determination of the Soviet people would turn the tide of the war in subsequent years, culminating in the eventual defeat of Nazi Germany. The German invasion of the Soviet Union in 1941 was a campaign of unprecedented scale and devastation. It exposed the hubris of Hitler's ambitions, the brutal realities of Nazi ideology, and the immense sacrifices required to resist such aggression. Operation Barbarossa reshaped the course of the Second World War, drawing Germany into a conflict it could not sustain and setting the stage for the Soviet Union's rise as a dominant military and political power. The human cost of the invasion, millions of lives lost, cities reduced to rubble, and entire populations displaced, is a sobering reminder of the destructive capacity of war, and the resilience required to overcome it. Sand and steel. The Siege of Tobruk. The Siege of Tobruk, which spanned from April to November 1941, was a pivotal engagement in the North African campaign of the Second World War. It tested the resolve of the Allied forces, particularly the Australian troops who became synonymous with the defence of the port city, against the German-Italian Axis led by the formidable General Erwin Rommel. Tobruk's strategic significance lay in its position as a key logistical hub, crucial for controlling supply lines and enabling further military operations in the region. The siege not only showcased the grit and resilience of the defenders but also highlighted the challenges of desert warfare and the dynamic interplay of strategy and resources that defined the campaign. Following the successful British Operation Compass, which had pushed Italian forces back into Libya, Tobruk fell under Allied control in early 1941. The city's port became a vital asset for the Allies, enabling them to sustain operations deeper into enemy-held territory. However, the situation shifted dramatically with the arrival of Rommel and the Afrika Korps in North Africa. Charged with stabilizing the Axis position and recapturing lost ground, Rommel quickly proved to be a master tactician, mounting a swift counteroffensive that reclaimed much of Cyrenaica, and left Tobruk isolated and encircled by April 10, 1941. The Allied forces, primarily composed of Australian troops under the command of General Leslie Morshead, were tasked with defending Tobruk against the Axis onslaught. Despite being outnumbered and surrounded, the defenders turned the city's formidable defences into a stronghold. The perimeter was fortified with anti-tank ditches, barbed wire, and entrenched positions, forcing Rommel's troops to engage in costly frontal assaults. The harsh desert environment, characterized by scorching days, freezing nights, and frequent sandstorms, compounded the difficulties faced by both sides. Rommel's initial strategy focused on breaking through the Allied defences using a combination of infantry attacks and armoured thrusts. The Afrika Korps, renowned for its mobility and effectiveness in desert warfare, aimed to overwhelm the defenders with superior firepower and tactical ingenuity. However, the terrain around Tobruk, characterized by rocky outcrops and open desert, nullified some of the advantages of the German tanks. The defenders capitalized on their knowledge of the terrain, setting up ambushes and deploying artillery to devastating effect. Anti-tank guns, particularly the British 2-pounder and captured Italian artillery pieces, played a critical role in repelling Axis assaults. The siege was marked by intense and often brutal engagements. The Allies employed a strategy of active defense, launching frequent raids and counterattacks to disrupt Axis positions and supply lines. These raids, often carried out under the cover of darkness, demonstrated the ingenuity and determination of the defenders. The use of coordinated artillery barrages and infantry maneuvers kept the Axis forces off balance and inflicted significant casualties. For the Axis, the inability to capture Tobruk quickly became a major setback. The prolonged siege drained resources and manpower, diverting attention and supplies from other operations. The Afrika Korps, reliant on stretched supply lines from Tripoli, faced logistical challenges that were exacerbated by Royal Navy and Royal Air Force operations targeting Axis convoys in the Mediterranean. The failure to secure Tobruk also undermined Rommel's broader strategy of advancing toward Egypt and threatening the Suez Canal, a key Allied objective. The psychological impact of the siege was profound. For the Allies, the successful defense of Tobruk became a symbol of resistance and determination. The Australian troops, often referred to as the Rats of Tobruk, earned a reputation for their resilience and fighting spirit. Their ability to hold the line against one of Germany's most capable commanders boosted Allied morale at a critical juncture in the war. Conversely, the siege eroded Axis confidence and highlighted the limitations of Rommel's forces when operating under resource constraints and against well-prepared defenses. By November 1941, the stalemate at Tobruk ended with Operation Crusader, a British-led offensive aimed at relieving the siege and pushing the Axis forces back. The operation, though costly, succeeded in breaking the encirclement of Tobruk and forcing Rommel to retreat westward. The relief of Tobruk marked a turning point in the North African campaign, shifting the momentum in favor of the Allies and paving the way for future offensives. The Siege of Tobruk remains a defining episode in the Second World War, exemplifying the tenacity and resourcefulness of the Allied forces in the face of adversity. It underscored the strategic importance of logistics, the challenges of desert warfare, and the value of cohesive and determined defense. The legacy of the siege endures as a testament to the sacrifices and heroism of those who fought to hold a critical bastion against overwhelming odds. Courage under fire. The Siege of Leningrad. The Siege of Leningrad, lasting from September 8, 1941, to January 27, 1944, was one of the longest and most harrowing sieges in history. This grueling episode of the Second World War exemplified the human spirit's capacity to endure extreme adversity while highlighting the strategic importance of the city to both Axis and Soviet forces. Encircled by German and Finnish troops, Leningrad endured an unrelenting blockade that brought starvation, death, and destruction to its inhabitants. Yet, the city's survival became a symbol of Soviet resistance and determination. Leningrad, known today as St. Petersburg, held immense strategic and symbolic value. As a major industrial hub and the cradle of the Bolshevik Revolution, it was a key target for Adolf Hitler's Operation Barbarossa. Hitler saw the city as not only a logistical prize but also a political one, believing its capture would deal a severe blow to Soviet morale. Encircling the city, rather than storming it directly, was the chosen strategy, aiming to force surrender through attrition. This decision resulted in a prolonged siege that caused immeasurable suffering. The siege officially began on September 8, 1941, when German forces severed the last land connection to Leningrad, cutting off supplies and isolating the city. The Finns, advancing from the north, played a secondary role in the encirclement but refrained from attacking Leningrad directly. The German blockade was marked by constant artillery bombardments and air raids, which targeted infrastructure, industrial plants, and civilian areas. This relentless assault exacerbated the already dire living conditions. The people of Leningrad faced unimaginable hardship. The city's population, swollen with refugees, struggled to survive as food and fuel supplies dwindled. The harsh winter of 1941 to 1942, one of the coldest on record, compounded their suffering. With temperatures plunging to -40 degrees Celsius, residents were forced to burn furniture, books, and even wooden buildings to stay warm. The daily bread ration dropped to as little as 125 grams per person, and cases of starvation and malnutrition became widespread. People resorted to eating pets, wallpaper paste, and, in extreme cases, practiced cannibalism. Despite these conditions, Leningrad's citizens and defenders demonstrated remarkable resilience. The city continued to produce war materials in its besieged factories, contributing to the Soviet war effort. Cultural life persisted, with performances and exhibitions offering a semblance of normalcy amidst the chaos. Dmitri Shostakovich's Seventh Symphony, composed during the siege, became a powerful symbol of resistance and was performed in the city in 1942 despite the dire circumstances. The Soviet military launched several offensives to break the blockade, but progress was slow and costly. The Road of Life, a precarious supply route across the frozen Lake Ladoga, became a lifeline for the city, bringing in food, fuel, and ammunition while evacuating civilians. This tenuous connection was under constant threat from German air and artillery attacks, but it proved vital in sustaining the city's survival. The turning point in the siege came in January 1943, with the success of Operation Iskra, a Soviet offensive that established a narrow land corridor to Leningrad. While this partial relief eased the blockade's intensity, it took another year before the siege was fully lifted. On January 27, 1944, Soviet forces finally broke the German encirclement, liberating Leningrad after 872 days of relentless suffering. The toll of the siege was staggering. An estimated 1 million civilians died, primarily from starvation, with countless others succumbing to cold, disease, or bombings. The city was left in ruins, its infrastructure devastated, and its population traumatized. However, Leningrad's endurance became a source of pride for the Soviet Union, symbolizing the nation's capacity to withstand and overcome seemingly insurmountable challenges. The siege of Leningrad remains a stark reminder of the human cost of war and the extremes of suffering that people can endure. It highlights the strategic importance of urban centers in warfare, the role of civilian resilience in shaping military outcomes, and the devastating impact of blockades as a weapon of war. As one of the darkest chapters of the Second World War, the siege stands as both a testament to human endurance and a warning about the horrors of prolonged conflict. A Day of Infamy. The Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. The attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, marked a pivotal moment in the Second World War, bringing the United States into the conflict and forever altering the course of global history. Orchestrated by the Imperial Japanese Navy, the surprise assault on the U.S. naval base at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii was a strategic attempt to cripple the U.S. Pacific Fleet and enable Japan's expansion in Southeast Asia without American interference. However, the attack galvanized the United States, transforming it from a reluctant bystander to a leading force in the Allied war effort. The backdrop of Pearl Harbor's attack lay in the escalating tensions between the United States and Japan throughout the 1930s and early 1940s. Japan's imperial ambitions, particularly its aggressive expansion into China and Southeast Asia, collided with U.S. interests in the Pacific. The United States, opposing Japan's militarism and seeking to curtail its advances, imposed economic sanctions, including an oil embargo that threatened Japan's resource-dependent war effort. Facing a stark choice between withdrawing from its conquests or securing new sources of raw materials, Japan opted for military action. The planning of the Pearl Harbor attack was spearheaded by Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, Commander-in-Chief of the Japanese Combined Fleet. Yamamoto understood the risks of a prolonged war with the United States and aimed to deliver a decisive blow that would immobilize the U.S. Pacific Fleet and provide Japan with time to consolidate its gains. The attack, codenamed Operation Z, was meticulously planned and involved a coordinated strike by 6 aircraft carriers, carrying over 400 planes, including bombers, fighters, and torpedo aircraft. On the morning of December 7, 1941, Japanese aircraft launched their assault in 2 waves. The attack began at approximately 7:55 a.m. local time, catching the U.S. forces completely off guard. Within 2 hours, the Japanese had inflicted catastrophic damage. 8 battleships were either sunk or heavily damaged, including the USS Arizona, which suffered a direct hit and exploded, killing over 1,100 sailors. Over 180 aircraft were destroyed on the ground, and significant damage was inflicted on other vessels and facilities. Despite its devastating success, the attack on Pearl Harbor fell short of its ultimate objectives. Japan failed to destroy the U.S. Navy's aircraft carriers, which were fortuitously out at sea during the attack. The base's critical fuel storage tanks and repair facilities were also left untouched, enabling the Pacific Fleet to recover more swiftly than anticipated. These oversights, coupled with the United States' industrial might and mobilization capabilities, would undermine Japan's strategic goals in the long run. The human toll of the attack was immense. Over 2,400 Americans were killed, including military personnel and civilians, with an additional 1,000 wounded. The devastation left a deep scar on the American psyche, fueling outrage and a unified resolve to enter the war. On December 8, 1941, President Franklin D. Roosevelt addressed Congress, delivering his famous Day of Infamy speech, and the United States declared war on Japan, formally joining the Allies in their struggle against the Axis powers. The attack on Pearl Harbor had far-reaching consequences, both immediate and long-term. In the short term, it propelled the United States into the Second World War, bringing its vast resources and industrial capabilities to bear against the Axis powers. The war in the Pacific became a titanic struggle as the United States sought to reverse Japan's gains and eventually achieve total victory. The attack also highlighted vulnerabilities in U.S. preparedness, leading to significant changes in military organization and strategy. For Japan, the attack initially appeared to achieve its goals, enabling rapid expansion across Southeast Asia and the Pacific. However, it also awakened a formidable adversary. The United States' entry into the war, combined with its unparalleled capacity for industrial production, ultimately shifted the balance of power. Key battles such as Midway and Guadalcanal marked the turning points in the Pacific theater, reversing Japan's fortunes and paving the way for its eventual defeat. Pearl Harbor's legacy endures as a stark reminder of the consequences of miscalculation and the devastating impact of surprise military action. It also underscores the resilience and determination of a nation united by tragedy. The events of December 7, 1941, remain a defining moment in American history, shaping its role on the global stage and cementing its leadership in the post-war order. The depths of war. The Battle of the Atlantic. The Battle of the Atlantic, spanning the entirety of the Second World War from 1939 to 1945, was the longest continuous military campaign of the conflict and a pivotal struggle for control of crucial sea lanes in the Atlantic Ocean. This confrontation between the Allies and the Axis powers, primarily Germany, defined the war's maritime dimension, influencing logistics, strategies, and the ultimate outcome of the conflict. At its core, the battle revolved around securing the supply chains that connected North America to Great Britain and beyond, as these lifelines sustained the Allied war effort. The roots of the battle lay in the German strategy of undermining Britain's capacity to sustain its war effort. Recognizing that the United Kingdom was heavily reliant on imported goods, including food, fuel, and military supplies, Adolf Hitler's regime sought to sever these supply routes through unrestricted submarine warfare. The German U-boat fleet, operating in wolf packs, became the primary weapon in this campaign. The U-boats aimed to destroy merchant shipping on an unprecedented scale, strangling Britain's economy and forcing it to capitulate. The early years of the battle were marked by German successes. Using advanced tactics and benefiting from the element of surprise, U-boats wreaked havoc on Allied convoys, sinking millions of tons of shipping. The capture of France in 1940 provided Germany with new bases along the Atlantic coast, allowing U-boats to operate more effectively in the open ocean. British countermeasures, while determined, struggled to keep pace with the escalating threat. Naval escorts were limited, and technological advancements, such as sonar, were still in their infancy. The entry of the United States into the war in 1941 marked a turning point. The industrial might of the United States bolstered Allied naval production, leading to an increased number of escort vessels, aircraft, and, critically, the development of the Liberty ships. Cargo vessels produced quickly and in large numbers to replace losses. The collaboration between American and British forces, formalized through the Atlantic Charter and subsequent agreements, fostered the pooling of resources and expertise. This cooperation extended to technological advancements, including radar and improved sonar systems, which began to tilt the scales in favor of the Allies. The convoy system became the cornerstone of Allied strategy in the Atlantic. Merchant ships, organized into groups and protected by naval escorts, significantly reduced the risks of individual vessels being targeted by U-boats. The introduction of long-range aircraft, including the consolidated B-24 Liberator, provided critical air cover for convoys, closing the so-called Mid-Atlantic Gap, where U-boats had previously operated with impunity. Escort carriers, smaller and more flexible than fleet carriers, further enhanced this protective umbrella, allowing air patrols to extend over vast areas. Despite these advancements, the battle remained fiercely contested. German innovations, such as the snorkel, which allowed U-boats to operate submerged for longer periods, and improved torpedoes, posed persistent challenges. The Allies responded with tactics such as hunter-killer groups, task forces specifically dedicated to locating and destroying U-boats. The code-breaking efforts at Bletchley Park, which decrypted German Enigma communications, proved instrumental in countering the U-boat threat. By intercepting and analyzing German messages, the Allies gained valuable insights into U-boat movements and intentions, enabling them to anticipate and disrupt attacks. The turning point in the Battle of the Atlantic came in 1943, a year often described as the U-boat's Black May. The Allies achieved a decisive victory, sinking 41 U-boats in a single month while suffering relatively minor losses. This success was the combination of coordinated efforts, including improved technology, tactical innovations, and the overwhelming production capacity of the United States. From this point onward, the U-boat threat diminished significantly, allowing the Allies to focus on the build-up for major operations such as the D-Day invasion in 1944. The human cost of the Battle of the Atlantic was immense. Thousands of sailors, merchant mariners, and airmen lost their lives in the frigid waters of the Atlantic. The bravery of these individuals, who faced the constant threat of attack from unseen enemies, was matched by the resilience of those on the home front, who continued to supply the ships that sustained the war effort. The Axis also paid a heavy price, with U-boat crews suffering catastrophic losses. By the end of the war, over 75% of German submariners had perished. The strategic implications of the Battle of the Atlantic were profound. The survival of Britain as a base of operations for the Allied war effort and as a staging ground for the liberation of Europe hinged on the success of this campaign. The ability to maintain supply lines ensured the steady flow of troops, equipment, and resources, enabling the Allies to launch and sustain offensives on multiple fronts. The victory in the Atlantic also underscored the importance of technological innovation, intelligence, and international cooperation in modern warfare. The legacy of the Battle of the Atlantic endures as a testament to the critical role of sea power in determining the outcome of conflicts. It highlighted the interconnectedness of strategy, technology, and human courage in overcoming adversity. The lessons learned from this campaign have shaped naval doctrine and maritime security strategies to this day. As one of the most significant and prolonged battles of the Second World War, the Battle of the Atlantic remains a powerful reminder of the stakes of global conflict and the enduring need to safeguard the lifelines of nations. The bureaucracy of genocide. The Wannsee Conference. The Wannsee Conference, held on January 20, 1942, near Berlin, was a pivotal event in the history of the Holocaust and the Second World War. It marked the formalization of the so-called final solution to the Jewish question, a euphemism for the systematic genocide of the Jewish population of Europe. The conference brought together senior Nazi officials and bureaucrats to coordinate and streamline the mechanisms of mass murder, demonstrating the cold, calculated nature of the Nazi regime's atrocities. This meeting, led by SS Obergruppenführer Reinhard Heydrich, exemplified the intersection of ideology, bureaucracy, and state power in the execution of genocide. The meeting took place in a villa on the shores of Lake Wannsee, where 15 high-ranking officials gathered to discuss the implementation of policies that had already begun on a smaller scale. By 1942, mass shootings and deportations were already underway in occupied territories. The Wannsee Conference aimed to ensure cooperation among various government departments and refine the process to achieve the Nazi regime's genocidal goals efficiently. The attendees included representatives from the SS, the Reich Ministry for the Interior, the Foreign Office, and other institutions integral to the machinery of the state. Heydrich, acting under the authority of Heinrich Himmler, chaired the meeting. His opening remarks framed the deportation and extermination of Jews as a policy decision already made by Adolf Hitler, though no direct evidence of a formal order was presented at the conference. Heydrich outlined the need for a unified approach to the Jewish question, emphasizing the logistical and administrative aspects of the plan. He presented detailed statistics on Jewish populations across Europe, and discussed the phased deportation of Jews to extermination camps in occupied Poland. The conference participants addressed logistical challenges, including transportation, legal definitions of Jewish identity, and the handling of mixed-race individuals and intermarried couples. These discussions underscored the systematic nature of the genocide, as officials debated the categorization and treatment of individuals in terms of their racial purity. Such cold, bureaucratic deliberations starkly contrasted with the human suffering that these policies would cause. The Wannsee Conference is significant not only for its role in the Holocaust but also for what it reveals about the Nazi regime's approach to governance and ideology. The meeting exemplified the fusion of ideology and efficiency, as the participants sought to rationalize and streamline the process of extermination. It highlighted the complicity of various state institutions in the Holocaust, demonstrating that genocide was not merely the result of rogue elements within the SS but a coordinated effort involving multiple layers of government. The implementation of the final solution following the Wannsee Conference involved the expansion of extermination camps, including Auschwitz-Birkenau, Treblinka, Sobibor, and Belzec. These camps were equipped with gas chambers and crematoria, enabling the Nazis to murder millions with industrial efficiency. By the end of the Holocaust, approximately 6 million Jews had been killed, along with millions of others targeted by the regime, including Romani people, disabled individuals, political dissidents, and others deemed undesirable by Nazi ideology. The minutes of the Wannsee Conference, known as the Wannsee Protocol, were discovered after the war and became crucial evidence in understanding the systematic nature of the Holocaust. They provided a chilling glimpse into the bureaucratic processes and mindset of the Nazi leadership, revealing the extent to which genocide was planned and executed as a state policy. The Wannsee Conference remains a symbol of the Holocaust's horrifying efficiency and the dangers of unbridled state power and ideology. It serves as a reminder of the capacity for human cruelty when governance becomes detached from morality and ethics. As historians and societies continue to grapple with the legacy of the Holocaust, the Wannsee Conference stands as a stark warning against the consequences of dehumanization, prejudice, and totalitarianism. Turning the tide in the Pacific. The Battle of Midway. The Battle of Midway, fought from June 4 to June 7, 1942, was a defining moment in the Pacific theater of the Second World War. Widely regarded as one of the most important naval battles in history, it marked a decisive victory for the United States against Imperial Japan, and significantly altered the course of the war. The battle demonstrated the critical role of intelligence, strategic planning, and carrier-based warfare, effectively shifting the balance of power in the Pacific. Following Japan's stunning attack on Pearl Harbor in December 1941 and its rapid expansion across the Pacific, the United States faced the daunting task of countering an aggressive and seemingly unstoppable adversary. Japan, emboldened by its earlier successes, sought to eliminate the U.S. Pacific Fleet as a strategic threat by luring it into a decisive battle. The Japanese plan, conceived by Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, centered on an assault on Midway Atoll, a small but strategically significant island approximately halfway between Asia and North America. Capturing Midway would provide Japan with a forward base to launch further offensives, potentially forcing the United States into a negotiated peace. The Japanese fleet, comprising 4 fleet carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Hiryu, and Soryu, along with battleships, cruisers, and support vessels, vastly outnumbered the American forces. However, a critical advantage tipped the scales in favor of the United States: intelligence. American cryptanalysts, led by Commander Joseph Rochefort and his team at Station Hypo, had successfully broken Japanese naval codes, allowing the U.S. to anticipate the attack on Midway. Armed with this knowledge, Admiral Chester W. Nimitz, Commander-in-Chief of the U.S. Pacific Fleet, orchestrated a bold defensive strategy. Rather than being caught off guard, as the Japanese had hoped, the U.S. positioned its carriers, USS Enterprise, USS Hornet, and USS Yorktown, in an ambush near Midway. Additionally, Midway's defenses were bolstered with aircraft, submarines, and coastal artillery, turning the atoll into a formidable outpost. Despite the loss of numerical superiority, the element of surprise and the resolve of American forces proved decisive. The battle began on the morning of June 4, 1942, when Japanese aircraft launched their first wave of attacks on Midway. While the airfield sustained damage, American anti-aircraft fire and fighters managed to inflict significant losses on the Japanese planes. Concurrently, U.S. scout planes located the Japanese carriers, setting the stage for a counteroffensive. In a series of daring strikes, American dive bombers, launched from Enterprise and Yorktown, achieved remarkable success. By the afternoon, 3 of Japan's carriers, the Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu, were ablaze and rendered inoperable. The Japanese retaliated with a counterstrike that severely damaged Yorktown, eventually leading to its sinking. However, American forces maintained the upper hand. On June 5, U.S. planes tracked down and destroyed the remaining Japanese carrier, Hiryu, effectively ending Japan's capacity for offensive operations in the battle. The outcome of the Battle of Midway was a devastating blow to Japan. The loss of 4 fleet carriers, along with over 300 aircraft and their experienced pilots, significantly weakened Japan's naval aviation capabilities. In contrast, the United States emerged with its carrier force largely intact and bolstered by a decisive victory that reinvigorated Allied morale. Midway marked the first major defeat for Japan in the Pacific and a turning point in the war, as it halted Japanese expansion and shifted the strategic initiative to the Allies. Several factors contributed to the American victory at Midway. Intelligence played a pivotal role, as the ability to intercept and decipher Japanese communications allowed the US to anticipate and counter Japan's plans effectively. The skill and bravery of American pilots, who carried out high-risk attacks against formidable odds, were equally critical. Additionally, the innovative use of aircraft carriers and dive bombers underscored the growing importance of air power in naval warfare, signaling the end of the battleship era. The significance of Midway extended beyond the immediate tactical and strategic outcomes. It demonstrated the resilience and ingenuity of the United States in the face of adversity, providing a psychological boost to a nation still reeling from Pearl Harbor. For Japan, the battle marked the beginning of a defensive struggle that would ultimately culminate in its surrender 3 years later. The Battle of Midway remains a testament to the enduring principles of strategy, intelligence, and courage in warfare. It exemplifies how preparation, adaptability, and bold decision-making can overcome numerical disadvantages and change the course of history. As one of the most pivotal engagements of the Second World War, Midway's legacy endures as a symbol of the power of determination and ingenuity in the face of overwhelming odds. In the next chapter, we will cover the First Battle of El Alamein, as well as the Manhattan Project, the development of the world's first nuclear bomb, and the Nazi war machine grinds to a halt in Stalingrad.